Hello and welcome to this very special episode of Tech Bites. I'm joined by Michael Cade here on the shores of Lake Washington and Kirkland, Washington in the U.S. Michael, thanks for being back on Tech Bites.
Yeah, pleased to be here.
Now, Michael, you've come off of such a busy week. Last week, you had KubeCon.
Yeah, KubeCon CloudNativeCon in Chicago.
And we had the Veeam Analyst Summit here in the Seattle area. I'm grateful because you stayed an extra day because we were going to do this recording. So thank you for that. But I know you've been on the episode a few times, even some replays, but give a quick intro of you and your kind of expanded role as field CTO.
Yeah. So I've been at Veeam for 8.5 years now. Started off as an SE in the UK team and then moved into Rick's team, Bossatron. But my focus there was around storage and infrastructure, virtualization. And 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was, did you call it Paratrooper?
Project Paratrooper. I had you a special project.
Where it was, let's go and talk about, go and learn, but also be part of that Kubernetes and that cloud native ecosystem and community, and go and understand how we can help there. How do we educate? How do we do the things that Veeam have done in this infrastructure space in that cloud native ecosystem? So 2.5 years of really evangelizing Veeam technologies in that space, but equally trying to learn as we go.
Well, I'd also say that he's the chief architect of 90 Days of DevOps, which is a cool thing. And I'm playing back the timeline. So the acquisition was in 2020, Kasten. So it was in 2021, I think, right before KubeCon, that we, did engage Project Paratrooper. So, good stuff. And, first part of today's episode is really going to recap kind of the history, the reverse roadmap of the major releases of Kasten. So let's switch over to the slides here. And, typical Veeam fashion, Michael, walk us through the history of some of these releases.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note here. So every major event, so whether it be so generally speaking, it's normally KubeCon Europe and then KubeCon North America. We changed it up earlier this year because we had such a focus around Red Hat OpenShift with 6.0. But really what these are is I would even call it a marketing bundle of everything that we've delivered over the last 6 months. So it's not a forward-looking roadmap. It's this is what we've done so far. And last week we announced 6.5. So 6.5, we release code every 2 weeks. So there's something called a sprint where our software developers are building new releases, bug fixes, security patches, all of that good stuff that we can move very quickly and deliver that on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis.
So that's a very interesting thing. You talk about those sprints, those 2-week sprints. How does that affect version numbers, right? So as of last week, we are on 6.5, just coming off of this event here. But, next week will be 2 weeks. Does that make it 6.5 little number?
Yeah, exactly. So it's easier if we go back to 6.0, it went 6.0 or 6.0.1 and 2 and 3 up until that.
So 24.
I think we got to around 23, 24 before we then go over to 6.5.
Oh, okay, cool.
So yeah, generally speaking, you're getting 24 releases a year.
Yeah, so probably 6.0 to 12. And then it's time for 6.5. Matt, think of that.
Now KubeCon always puts a bit of a sticker in it because it's not always 6 months in between each event. So next year we go to Paris, but it's in March. So March the 21st, which happens to be my wife's birthday. So someone might either have to go for me or I've got to take the wife.
Oh boy.
We'll work that one out, right? But it's a lot earlier than what it used to be. So last year you could see that's why, again, that Red Hat Summit was a key, and as well as Veeam On, because there's a lot of integration with Veeam for that release. That was where I demoed on main stage at Veeam On the instant FCD recovery. So the history of Veeam and our instant recovery, bringing that into the Kubernetes world and coupling that with vSphere. So that's just one of the key integrations, as well as that Red Hat OpenShift. Probably our largest footprint of customers out there is using Red Hat OpenShift. So obviously it was a big key area to go and present some of that stuff earlier on this year.
Yeah. So it's the KubeCon North America Cloud Native Con that was in Chicago. Last year was about the same time, late October was in Detroit, and then Europe 2022 was at Amsterdam.
So Amsterdam was earlier this year. That one was Valencia. 5.0 was Valencia. It was the same week as VMon, so I missed that one.
Yeah,
I had to be at VMon.
That's right. Danny Boss said VMon is more important for Michael Cade. So let's take us right up till right now. 6.5. Tell me about some of the capabilities that really were important there.
So there's been a trend. If you look at these big ticket items or these big umbrella items, you see there's been a big focus around security. And even if you look at the wider Veeam data platform, you'll see that security is obviously a trend there. But understanding, and I talk a lot about, well, it doesn't matter if I'm talking about cloud-based workloads or cloud native, we think about the bang being the bad thing that happens. We think about right of bang being the remediation, left of bang being the prevention. And we're very good at the remediation and getting stuff fixed when bad things happen. But we're starting to do more on that preventative task, and you'll see that from a Veeam technology perspective, but also from a Kasten point of view, integrating into SIEM type integrations. In particular, here in the cloud native world, we integrate with the 6.5 release into Datadog. If you were at KubeCon last week, you'd have seen that they probably had the biggest stand there. Really interesting. They give observability, but it's not just about Kubernetes. It's about cloud workloads. It's about on-prem virtualization. It's about other databases, and they give insight into that. It's a really good tool in that space for us to integrate into. But it's also extensible. So yes, we launched it with Datadog, but ultimately that API can be available to any other. So that just continues that security. We already have the ability to offload those backups into immutable object storage locations like we do with VBR as well. And then the other thing was around scale of these clusters. So whether you've got massive amounts of clusters, or whether your application is just spanning over multiple clusters as well. So we're seeing an increase of that, not only just adoption, but now maybe we've got a cluster per application, or at least a grouping of them. So we had to do some work around scalability, but also other workloads, and we'll touch on that as we go through as well.
Yeah, it's great to see really consistent themes through the platform, Michael. You talk about some of the SIEM integration, security across the platform. It's welcome everywhere. So great stuff. Let's go to the next slide, really, and walk me through some market behavior, some deployment patterns, right? I've listened to you talk about this for a long time, and every time I hear kind of a state of the containers and state of Kubernetes and how they're deployed for cloud native apps, there's changing behaviors. But walk us through what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I think so. There's always this myth around stateless versus stateful, and that Kubernetes is a stateless workload and stateless cluster. I would argue that there is no stateless application unless you're really running a static application that runs in a container and that's all you're doing. Granted, I'll give you that. That's stateless. But I would say 9 times out of 10, that application is always going to be connected to some sort of database or data service. Now, I think the stateless versus stateful is regarding whether we run the database inside of Kubernetes or not. Now, if you go and look at the Datadog report that just came out a couple of weeks ago, you'll see that there's an absolute trend on people running databases and data services within their Kubernetes cluster. But there's other deployment patterns as well in there. So when we look at PaaS-based services such as AWS RDS, it's still part of that application. It's still part of the wider scope for that application. So what K10 has the ability to do is go out to that Amazon RDS and protect that alongside the stateless configuration within the Kubernetes cluster. So that could be Azure SQL, but that equally could be Azure, MongoDB Atlas, or it could be even a virtual machine running Postgres, or a virtual machine running any data service. So I think that's a big trend that we talk about as a big differentiator when we're speaking to customers, and we're now at the point of talking about this persistence across as an option. It doesn't always have to be inside the cluster, but we'll get onto the inside the cluster as well shortly.
Tell me about the middle model here.
So this one is, and from a virtualization point of view, who remembers running your own management vSphere environment. So you'd have maybe a 3-node cluster, which is where your virtual center would live, and maybe some of your other operational infrastructure tools. And that would be a dedicated management vSphere cluster. And then you'd have your operation, your workload cluster underneath. So think about that in this light, is that I'm going to run an infrastructure cluster, Kubernetes cluster, and within that is going to be my storage layer. And I'm going to present my storage from there into another Kubernetes cluster. And you can kind of say that this is a way in which you can run your own paths. I mean, you can compete with AWS or any of them if you want, but 9 times out of 10, what this gives you is a little bit more tweakability. I don't know if that's a word, Rick. It sounds like it's come out of your dictionary.
It is a dictionary.
But what that does is that allows us to provide that data service into our application with all of the flexibility of being able to tweak that performance of that. Whereas maybe with RDS, the DBA doesn't get as much control of that. So then the third one here is around, okay, now I've decided that over the last 2 years of Kubernetes releases, which is 6 releases. They release 3 times a year, that upstream Kubernetes code. And every single release that's happened, so the last 6 releases, plus a couple more, have all contained something to do with storage or data within Kubernetes. So that be the container storage interface and how we represent storage within there and how we interact with that. The operator model, again, I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but this allows us to run our data service as close to that application as possible. And with that, we then need to consider, the same as the other two, we have to consider consistency of that as well and how we protect that. So really, it's a freedom of choice of, well, what way do you want to run that? And it might be your DBA choosing that. It might be the application architecture that chooses that, or it might be an infrastructure or an operations decision to throw everything in the same cluster, because that might give us a better performance.
Well, yeah, it is a family show, so we don't want to get too far into the weeds, Michael, but I did pick on this. I do think I'm learning things, so tell me if I'm wrong. In this model here, where you're deploying the databases in the Kubernetes itself, is this where some of those blueprints come in?
Well, the blueprints are actually used across all 3 of these, but the blueprint that we use is a project called Canister. We'll touch on Canister in a bit, but K10 heavily uses that to orchestrate the consistency of that. Again, let's correlate that back to what we know within the Veeam world around virtual machines running databases. We have to consider how we take that application consistency of that database. How do we pause I/O? How do we coerce that workload and then take a good copy of data instead of just yanking the power cable out? And this is a huge differentiator that we have in the market, is that we can provide the ability to jump into those data services through these blueprints that the Canister framework allows us to, and then allow us to take a consistent copy of that data, so that when you're restoring that, you've got a good, solid copy, consistent copy of that data.
Yeah, I tell you, I am learning stuff. And I know you hit on the 2 big ticket items, but wait, there's more. Walk us through, Michael, kind of the rest of that for 6.5, or anything else that you might want to pull out. And also highlight, we had a great blog. I think that was Gurav wrote that blog. Yeah. So that's a good one.
So yeah, like I mentioned around the seam integrations, where Datadog was very loud and proud at KubeCon last week, right? And again, it says example Datadog because that's the one that we're really going to market. That's the one that we're blogging about, but it's extensible. The other thing is that there's an audit log within Kubernetes natively, which is highlighted here around high signal events. Think about its own syslog, so it understands, and we already know what we're looking for, so we can start to see smoke signals when something bad happens within the cluster, and we could then trigger an event based on that, whether that be take a backup now or start a restore now into a different cluster. Some of that stuff. The other security is around secure supply chain. There's some integrations into the Azure container hosts and the storage in there, but equally around a hardened
image repository,
container repository. So one of the things from a DoD perspective is that they want a secure supply chain. I mean, everyone does, and we already live and die by that methodology anyway. But from a DoD perspective, Iron Bank is renowned for that. It's gone through all the testing, and we're the only enterprise data protection vendor within that registry as well.
Wow, there's so much more to it, and that security element, like I said, resonates so well through the rest of the platform. And there's always more to it. And then this is what we have now. There's going to be more stuff in 2 weeks. That's scale.
Yeah.
Super important. Actually, this one's picking my interest. Talk to me about EBS CBT.
So one of the things, and it's very cyclical in what we've already seen from a physical backup, from a virtual backup, from a cloud backup, and now we get to cloud native, is that things like change bot tracking, they've not been implemented. So Amazon, for example, here, they're writing their own change bot tracking engine. They have that within EBS, so Elastic Block Storage, and we're hooking into that so that our very fast, efficient backups are incremental. Now, I would say as well, and this is kind of a separate task, but it's worth mentioning, is that we're working upstream with Kubernetes to bring in a universal change bot tracking engine into the CSI driver. So there's a public KEP out there that you can go and look at, and it's basically a way in which we're trying to help the community do the right thing from a change bot tracking engine perspective.
That's really significant because incrementals go great, and so this would apply only to EKS with
and Red Hat OpenShift
and Red Hat OpenShift. Okay, so but yeah, those are two platforms, two Kubernetes orchestration platforms. But this kind of standards-based approach would be, dare I say, universal.
Yeah, exactly that. Any Kubernetes cluster would take advantage of that. Now, it would potentially then open up the door for enterprise storage solutions to bring in their own implementation or enhancements around that CBT driver as well.
Yeah, that's outstanding. That's good stuff. Anything else you want to add on the 6.5?
So I think there's two big things. One is the large scale multi-cluster. Now, we've had multi-cluster within K10, and what we mean here, so every Kubernetes cluster that you have, K10 is deployed, and we're seeing, like I mentioned up front, we're seeing large-scale deployments of multiple clusters. So whether that be at the edge, but also fast-paced clusters being spun up, spun down, but they're still running a data server, so they need protecting. So not only is multi-cluster been refactored I won't go into the weeds around that, but it also provides us the ability of leveraging GitOps to be able to deploy K10. So especially those fast or they don't last very long clusters, I want a quick way of being able to get all of my tools, including K10, on there. So GitOps is a great way of being able to say, I need that application there to protect it, and then I'm going to throw it away. So it allows us to get to some great scale. The other thing on there worth mentioning is around this VMs on Kubernetes, which when you think about what Veeam's done for the last 15 years around protecting virtual machines and so on, actually more than 15, I think it's 16.
Quite a while, yeah.
And we're seeing, so last week at KubeCon, we saw Kubernetes is not just a control plane it's not just a container orchestration. Think of it as a desired state or a reconciliation loop for any workload that fits. So OpenShift virtualization, or the project that they use there is called KubeVirt. KubeVirt went 1.0 earlier on this year, another open source project. So seeing virtual machines managed and orchestrated through Kubernetes is quite a compelling and cool way to think about where we can run virtualization.
Well, I think that it actually opens up the door to just more choice on platforms nowadays. I mean, I talk to a lot of customers and partners that want to explore all these different platforms, but one of their concerns is, can I protect it? And if I move to it, if I commit to this, can I protect it? But I think that's pretty. So
the important thing here is, we've enhanced it, but this is not new. Like, we've had the ability within K10 to protect those virtual machines since the beginning of the year. So we've had that capability. What we're doing here is looking at the block mode backup instead of file mode, which allows us to be more granular when it comes to recovery. Again, we've got some pretty good experience when it comes to backing up virtual machines.
Well, it's new to me, and I call me impressed, but I think this is good stuff, Cade. All right. So last thing, we have also, the community, the technology community at large, is really part of what we do here at Veeam and part of our product strategy. But talk to me about this milestone that you kind of alluded to.
Yeah, so I've already mentioned around like change bot tracking being a big engine for us and why we can commit in to build that within the community. I think the other part of this is around raising awareness of data protection. No one gets out of bed apart from probably me and you, Rick, and a few others, where we get out and we think about backup and we think about data protection and resiliency around that. What we're trying to do with Canister, so Canister, as I mentioned before, is an application framework that allows us to dive into the data service and take a consistent copy of that database or data service. It doesn't just have to be databases. And we do that in the form of a blueprint. A blueprint is basically the instruction set to say, back this up in this way at this point. And we decided from a community point of view to raise raise awareness is let's give it to the CNCF as a sandbox and see where it goes and allow the community then to give us some feedback on that. Now, K10 still heavily uses this, but Canister as a standalone tool and project allows us to at least consider that protection of the database. Let's remember that the data service is the most important. It also allows for us to tell a portability story. You can see some of the community blueprints down there as well around things like Cassandra, the Amazon RDS that I mentioned, some operators there around K8, Cassandra as well, Microsoft SQL Server, off-the-shelf software that you can go and deploy in there. And then we're also seeing requests and community involvement around other newer upcoming cloud native databases such as vector databases. So when we think about, we've done a whole session where we haven't spoken about AI, but I'm going to break it now.
There you go.
So a vector database is how we store our embeddings to create our LLMs, or at least interact with our language models. So I think we'll continue to upgrade and update this and keep this messaging going. It also allows us to tell that or raise awareness of that data protection story in this community, I think, is the important part.
Oh, man. So this is fantastic, Michael. I think that this is a lot of information, but right now we can still go to kasten.io for some product information. We got the different blogs as well. And, you are on Twitter at Michael Cade 1. You're the sole creator of 90 Days of DevOps, even though it's
there's a load of community,
a load of help coming in, and that's just an incredible contribution. And am I right that we started something new this year? 90 Days of something else?
No, so it's still 90 Days of DevOps, but this year is 90 sessions. So we're doing 90 YouTube videos from 90 different people on YouTube, where we're going to be covering loads of different perspectives, whether it's the learning curve, whether it's different tooling, process, principles around DevOps.
Yeah. Well, one thing I can tell you about this cloud native community, friends, is that if you want to learn this, it is so easy to self-learn. There's so many resources out there, and then structured or unstructured. And I'm not talking about data. I'm just talking about structured learning types and things like that. So anyways, thank you so much, Michael, for this great episode. And next week, we're not going to have a show. We've got a U.S. holiday, the Thanksgiving holiday. No Tech Bites show next week. And honestly, we got to give our video team a rest. This team has been under the bench press all year, Veeam Resiliency Summit, and more. So a big shout out to Jeffrey and Felicia and Mark on the social media and video production teams. I do think we're going to sneak in a industry insights. I'm not quite sure, but you know where to find us on the Quadcast. So on behalf of the Veeam Global Marketing teams, Zilla, give me the rock right there on camera. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
In 2023, innovation fueled every industry, from renewable energy to space travel, all powered by data. The world runs on data. It's worth more than oil, and inherent value brings inherent risk. Natural disasters, accidents, and ransomware attacks are increasingly prevalent. Years of globally impactful work can be erased in an instant. But not with us. With Veeam, your enterprise becomes radically resilient. We give you the power to restore any workload, anywhere, anytime, instantly, so you can meet every challenge head-on. There's a reason over 80% of Fortune 500 companies work with us. We provide comprehensive recovery with tailored solutions that scale with you. When you partner with a global leader in data protection and ransomware recovery, you can bounce forward. Veeam, Radical resilience starts here.